Hi, this is Jim Lyon at Church of God Ministries in Anderson, Indiana, on the northeast side of the Indianapolis Metro. And we are so glad to welcome you here today to this town hall. And with me at the table, some very outstanding guests. To my left, first up, Kimberly Majeski. Welcome, Kimberly.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
Kimberly is the executive director at Christian Women Connection, which is an agency of ministry that helps women impact their world for the good, for Jesus' sake.
That's right.
And also calls women into ministry. And we're so glad to have Kimberly with us. And just to her left is Heather Webb. Heather, welcome. We're so glad you're here.
So grateful to be here.
Heather is the executive director at Children of Promise, a title she shares with her husband, Mike, and they're a team leading another one of our recognized agencies in the affiliation with the General Assembly of the Church of God, and they work especially with children and providing child sponsorship around the world with footprints on the ground through the Church of God all around the globe. These two women of faith have joined us today because this issue of the town hall, just before Christmas, is going to be devoted to the idea of what we can do for the good to save, to rescue, to help give life to the most vulnerable, to change the world in Jesus' name. And you know, Christmas is coming, and you may be just thinking as you're tuning in today, in the back of your head, you're just interested in what's going on in the world, and you were not prepared to solve your Christmas gift list today. But we're going to give you a chance today.
You do it all right here.
To do it right here, you can get that done and make a difference. And it's a very accessible and amazing way in which you can help. And you don't have to be a philanthropist, a billionaire to do it. Because the ministries here at this table actually are changing the world, and it's accessible to all of us. So welcome. We're so glad you're here. And let's just dive right in.
Yeah.
A few years ago, well, man, it's been like
a decade.
Almost, it's been over a decade, 11 years ago. Actually, it was June of 2013. I was being proposed as the next general director for Church of God Ministries, a seat that I hold now and will until this coming June in 2025. But in June of 13, there was a big convention in Anderson, Indiana. I was there, and so was Kimberly. And we were in the studio. It wasn't exactly this studio, but the predecessor to this studio. And while we were there, we ran into a friend. His name is Asim Das. And Asim is an elder statesman of the Church of God in India. And he and his wife had very, very up close and personal responsibility and contact with a ministry called The Shelter, a place I had visited before. It's a residential program for girls in India, and I was familiar with The Shelter, but Asim took us both by surprise, Kimberly and I, by saying, "Oh, I hope you will remember that in 2014 we'll celebrate the 100th anniversary of The Shelter." And he goes on to say, "You know, Jim, this is the oldest continuously operating ministry that addresses social services in the Church of God in the whole world, established in India in 1914. And Kimberly and I looked at him and said, "Wow, I didn't realize that would be the centenary next year. That would be 2014. And then he goes on to say, and you know, the whole thing began with two people named E. Faith Stewart. Her name was Etta Faith Stewart, I later learned, but she went by Faith, and A.D. Khan. E. Faith Stewart was an American missionary who went to India for the Church of God, and A.D. Khan was one of the founders of the Church of God in India. He was himself an Indian, and came to a knowledge of the Church of God and the teaching of the gospel through this lens. And they met up and they started The Shelter to save children who were being made vulnerable and actually being swept into human trafficking. That was what Asim said to us, and we were quite surprised because I knew about the great work of The Shelter. I thought it was to help indigent children, children who might be economically disadvantaged, but it had a history in the roots of this movement to interdict, and stop, to slow down human trafficking, the selling of our bodies for untoward purposes, that nobody should be enslaved in such a work, and certainly not forced against their will or be forced there by circumstances because they can't afford to live otherwise, so on. And he just started talking to us about that. And then we said, "Wow, Asim, thank you for that work." Later, a few months later, Kimberly and I were talking, and we had a conversation about what what we might do and how the celebration of the shelter could be. And we also talked about how could we unite the Church of God around a cause that everyone could, embrace, because not everyone is on board with everything. But here's something, surely, helping children who are vulnerable, could we help? So anyway, that led to what we call the traffic light.
Church of God Traffic Light. It felt like a real powerful moment that day with Asim Das, because anti-trafficking work was something that we were both very passionate about. I had launched a ministry here in central Indiana in 2010 to begin to speak to domestic trafficking and to reach out to women in local sex work. And Jim had been my pastor at the time, so you had been present for sort of all of that prayer and direction.
We took some risks in our local church.
We took some risks.
We certainly did.
We literally would have Bible study with our women and then load up our Wednesday night meal that we had at church and take it to the club, not a mile from our home church. And that's how the whole thing began. And so that had begun in 2010, and then we had heard about other works, and then we're sitting with Asim that day. And for him to tell us that this was an initiative, a work, a passion that was so deeply rooted in Church of God history.
His observation was it galvanized the church in the day,
Yes.
100 years ago.
And telling us stories about E. Faith Stewart walking into these brothels and taking these babies out. And it struck a chord with us because it was very similar to work that we were engaged in and something that we cared about. And so we talked about it again and again, and then decided maybe this is something that we could invite the church to galvanize around again.
And it became a process. But the Chalk Traffic Light, which was born in the knowledge that we were going to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the shelter, and let's be clear, today, all these decades on from its founding, the children who find refuge and safety at the shelter have not themselves been trafficked. The idea is that we're giving them a way forward so that they would not be trafficked from their local villages from which they come and so on because of the economic distress that their families may face. But because of that origin, we started talking to the church about it. And through the Ministries Council, which is established by the General Assembly, we went to the General Assembly with a proposal for the traffic light, which was to raise $1 million to help support the work and at the shelter, and also to expand the net. And so a group of persons in the Church of God in disparate places who were already prompted by the Holy Spirit to work in this ministry of the gospel to provide life abundantly. Light and life to all he brings is a line out of the Christmas carol, Hark the Herald Angels Sing. And man, it's so as applicable to this work. And so the church did rally about it, and over $1 million was raised for the Chalk Traffic Light, and the capacity of the shelter was doubled. New buildings were constructed on the shelter campus in the city that it calls home in India, and the capacity was doubled thanks to the church's response 100 years after the founding to help engage the work. But that's not the only part of it. That was like maybe a flagship that sailed out of the harbor first, but other work like Stripped Love, which is now called Grace Horizons.
Yes.
And things like the Hope Ranch in Wichita, Kansas, which was born in the Church of God in Wichita. And Church on the Street, which had roots in Atlanta, which was helping kids who were runaways and so on, and trying to help make them safe. And One Heart
In Dayton.
in Dayton, Ohio, it grew out of the Church of God. The great woman of faith, Donna Cox, had a vision for helping to do this work on the corridor of I-75 in the United States, which is a transit zone. And also Children of Promise, which is our long-established and wonderful work of child sponsorship around the world, also became engaged because Children of Promise always provides help and a way forward and bring life to children who may be economically, spiritually, relationally disadvantaged. And they do so always through the footprint of local Church of God congregations in the place where the ministry is being delivered, whether it be in Africa or Latin America or in Asia. And so All of these things came together for the traffic light. And here we are now, years on from that initiative, and it's still living. We want you to know it's still alive, and there are new things going on. One thing that was at the table back in the day, 2014 already, was something called the Pink Door. Maybe you've heard of that. That's a part of our global strategy team here at Church of God Ministries. And the Pink Door was established in Berlin, Germany, which also is an intersectional transit zone for human trafficking in Europe. And the Pink Door has been led by Rhonda Phillips and her husband Kelly, who are on the field in Berlin. And we want you to know that that is still a flourishing work also. And by that I mean it's still meeting a desperate need and doing it very effectively and has grown, and in partnership with the Church of God in Germany. And Kelly and Rhonda have relocated. They're now resident in Cairo, Egypt. Rhonda still is in the mix of the governing board at the Pink Door in Berlin, but she now lives in Cairo. And in Cairo, as soon as the Phillips landed there, suddenly there were people who knew of the work, and they started to come together to see what could be done to interdict human trafficking in Cairo, which is one of the world's great mega cities. But also a place like that is where people come and go, and that's where people are sometimes disappeared into human slavery for the purpose of trafficking their bodies. All of this is still growing, and it's still working, and it's still rising up in the church to push back against the devil's work, to destroy the works of the devil. That's what John wrote in one of his letters to the New Testament church and to us. And it takes back what hell has stolen. And we're here today to talk about some exciting chances for you, even this Christmas or as the new year dawns, to get involved with exciting new developments and ongoing work on this fight against human trafficking. So now, let's talk about it. In Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a country in Southeast Asia, South Asia. It's not Southeast Asia, but South Asia. And on the Bay of Bengal, it's a very populous country. Over 100 million people call it home. It's a place where there is a lot of poverty, of vulnerability. It's a place where the climate is changing and threatens with flooding, which always undermines an economy too. And in that place, we also have a very vibrant work of the Church of God. And that vibrant work is not just in a place, but in that country. And I've been so privileged myself to be an eyewitness to visiting Bangladesh, and so impressed by the leadership and the vision. Today we want to talk about a particular place in Bangladesh where the Church of God in Bangladesh has identified as a great need, and now in a collaborative partnership with the global church is really making a dent in the devil's business. Where is that place? Heather, how would you say it?
The name of this town is Dalatia. And Dalatia as a town is a brothel. The entire town is a brothel.
But you're telling me that the whole place actually
place
functions in the buying and selling of people.
Yes. And all the things that go along with that, gambling and drugs and addiction of all kinds. It was a dream of the Church of God leader in Bangladesh. His name is Tapan Borman. He and his wife, when they were in seminary, they had a dream of starting a ministry in this area. And this has been decades ago. So to see their dream coming to fruition after all this time is a really fulfilling thing as well.
And the dream is to what?
So the dream is to minister to the needs of the women who are enslaved in the brothel along with their children. And so we at Children of Promise have the distinct honor of being invited to partner with them in this ministry. They have started through partnerships with other organizations, a ministry called the House of Hope, which ministers to women and to children in that community, offering medical care and social services and an opportunity for kids to come out of the brothel during the day for a safe place to escape the workings of the brothel. We hear lots of stories of kids when their moms are working being shooed out into the alleys or hidden underneath the beds while their moms are working.
And to our audience, we just want to remind you, this is, for some, maybe adult content, but what's being described here are sex workers who have children who are without an intervention like the ministry we're just describing, are constantly exposed, not just reading a book or seeing it on film, but they're actually in the room as these things take place. And you can only imagine how devastating that can be in the formation of a child's life, both boys and girls.
Right.
And so that brings us to the House of Hope.
Yeah, so the House of Hope is a place where these kids can go during the day to experience life outside the brothel and to see things that are, when they become exposed to something over and over again, it just becomes normal. And so it's an opportunity to intervene so that they can see there's a different normal out there that they can experience, and a different life of hope that they can experience in their futures.
And the House of Hope is a day program for children. It's not a residential program. We'll talk about that next, but it's a day program. So these children have a chance to come to the House of Hope, and there they learn how to color with crayons, or play games, or to explore life in healthy ways, right?
Yes.
And all in the context of a gospel witness. I mean, they understand that this is a place where Jesus people are helping them. Jesus is Lord.
Yeah.
And Kimberly's at the table at Christian Women Connection because they also are helping to put wind in the sail there, and also on the broader traffic light opportunities and needs, right? So CWC has actually set up a web page and is taking, you might say, the lead for the Church of God in fueling and shine a spotlight on this issue in our world and the church's capacity to actually change it for the better. Fair?
That's fair. One of the things that we know about human trafficking is that what you have to do is interrupt the cycle. It's very cyclical. Either we're talking about domestic or international. It can be circumstantially cyclical, can be generationally cyclical. But what's happening here at the House of Hope and the other MENA project you're talking about is this work is interrupting that flow. It's getting in the way of this, just perpetuating itself over and over again. And so that's one of the reasons we're so passionate to partner with Children of Promise in this good work through the Traffic Light effort.
And so back to Bangladesh, and we want to come back to CWC's work on a broader scale, but there's a collaboration between Christian Women Connection, Children of Promise, the Church of God in Bangladesh, and Global Strategy at Church of God Ministries, which helps support field staff in Asia. There is this collaborative effort in this town where the whole place is itself a functioning brothel, which is to say, when you walk into the town, at every block, at every turn, there is someone for sale. And that person who's for sale is probably, for all functional purposes, owned by someone else who's profiting off that person's body and reaping the financial benefit of that, while that person is trapped in a cycle from which they can't escape. And this whole town is now having the light of Jesus turned on. There are other Christian witnesses, other ministries that may do some outreach there, but so far as we know, the Church of God is the only resident body of believers in the community. Is that right, Heather? That's your understanding?
That's my understanding, yeah.
And so our chance is to actually to interrupt the course of the whole town's life through this witness of people on the ground. There is the House of Hope, we just described it, day program, and Children of Promise helps make that possible for children. You can sponsor a child to be in it because there's a cost to have the child have that care, to be educated, to be loved in a healthy way. And Children of Promise is a child sponsorship ministry. So today, before we end this town hall, think about that. Is that something that you'd like to do as a gift for Christmas? Maybe you want to do it just for Jesus' sake. Or maybe there's someone you know who has everything they need already, but might be honored if you told them, there's a child who's going to have a life because this Christmas we're making a gift. There's that. But there's also a residential program in this town because the kids who come for the day return in the evening to their family of origin. But there's also a residential program for the most vulnerable. This is just for girls. Boys and girls could be at House of Hope, but girls alone have this residential option where families can have their vulnerable daughters protected. That's called
The MENA Project.
the MENA Project.
Yeah, the MENA Project is a really extraordinary way to interrupt this cycle. So oftentimes it was grandma or great-grandma who was the first one to be enslaved in this brothel. And so she has a daughter, and the daughter grows up and becomes part of the family business, as grandma ages out. And then the
It's a
daughter's,
generational
this generational cycle of slavery. And so this interruption, using the MENA Project as a residential place for these young girls who are so vulnerable to growing up, they don't see another option. This is what they've known, this is what they've seen, this is what they've learned since birth. That this is what I'm growing up to be. To have that cycle interrupted, to see other options for what their future can look like. So the MENA Project is a residential program it can house up to 50 girls. We have 12 girls left who have not yet been sponsored, and so we're looking for sponsors for those girls.
And that is an important work also, the residential program. And Kimberly, you, as already declared, had a prompt in your heart. The Holy Spirit prompted you in 2010 to start exploring something that you probably understood existed but didn't actually see.
Right.
But you found yourself learning and discovering how people can be lost in this pattern, right? And that's even true here at home where we live. So some of the ministries in the traffic light that are beneficiaries of the traffic light include things abroad, like at the MENA Project or at the House of Hope, but also at Grace Horizons,
Yes.
or the Hope Ranch in Wichita.
That's right.
And tell us a little bit about that. How is it possible that someone in this country, the United States, or in Canada next door, would be vulnerable enough to be trafficked?
Well, any place that there is poverty is a place that is a potential for trafficking, particularly any place where women are in poverty. Trafficking isn't only limited to women. Men are trafficked too, but it's by and large
The overwhelming
overwhelming
number of
numbers
victims are women.
are
They're female.
women.
Yes.
In the U.S., domestic trafficking kind of is manifest in a little bit of a different way, in such that 70% of women who are trafficked in the U.S. are trafficked through the sex industry. And so that looks like clubs and websites and different sort of offerings that happen online, and but they're controlled. They're controlled.
They're not making their own choices.
They're not making their own choices. I always, have been dumbfounded that it is sometimes hard for people to find compassion. Well, that's how they chose to make their living, or that's what she's doing. We have a concept that these are folks who are employed in Los Angeles or at Las Vegas, pulling down, thousands of dollars a night. That's not true in Dayton, Ohio, or in Anderson, Indiana. These are women who, didn't grow up having the dream of their life to be, taking off, undressing, or selling their bodies as their plan. And so I think we can have compassion for once we understand how those patterns evolve. It takes root in the hearts of vulnerable, typically impoverished women. And it can happen very easily. Lots of grooming takes place. These folks who traffic in this work are very good at what they do.
And can recognize someone's vulnerability,
Yes.
not just by the way they dress, let's say, but just something emotionally or some signal that if they are pursued or valued for the upfront to develop a relationship, then they can be controlled. And
Yes.
that's how it works. And I know that you described the strip club that was near the church where I once pastored and where you were in the parish. I mean, it's just across the interstate from the church, was right on the interstate, right across was this strip club. And I've never been to a strip club, and I have driven by. My images or my sense of it is consequent to what I may have seen in a television show or some kind of reference scene in popular entertainment or even in the news. But as you went there with your team from that ministry called Strip Love, and came back with stories of
Yes.
young women who are sometimes still teenagers, maybe 18, and they find themselves in a desperate scenario because their families are not functioning well, by their families of origin. And maybe there's a pattern, as you've even said, in Bangladesh, Heather, but that pattern can exist here too, where
Yes.
mom or even a grandma may have made their way by selling their body. That's how they survived. And now there's an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old or a 21-year-old, and they may have a deadbeat boyfriend who's not
Controlling them,
providing
yeah.
or controlling them, or aside, he's on the curb playing video games, and she now has a baby, and there's nobody there, and so somebody else intervenes. But you get into that zone, and what seems like, as you said, people want to believe, well, that's their choice. Not so, and that's what you discovered right here in Anderson, Indiana. You might say the heart of the Bible Belt, across the highway from the church, right?
We just walked in there one night after much prayer, as you know, at the Chinese restaurant next door. We didn't know what people would think if they saw us in the parking lot of the club, so we would go to Yips next door and pray, and we just went in with cookies, a plate of cookies one night, and said we wanted to show you some love. We're your neighbors from the church down the street, and that began a ministry. And relationships, and what we were able to do was build relationships in that club, which opened the door to relationships with other clubs in Central Indiana, and launching teams across the United States and offering training so that people could understand how to interact with these women who were locked in what we call trauma bonds, and who are really being exploited and used and trafficked.
And the outcome is, not only do they find a way out for those who are responsive to the visit, and I'll always be haunted by the story of one dancer at that strip club. After a few weeks, you would go every Wednesday night, while the rest of us were at church in our prayer meeting. After the church dinner, you were across the highway in the strip club. But finally, some of the management said, "What are you doing here? Who are you people?"
Yeah.
And you said, "We just came to love you." And one of the gals who was a dancer, a young woman, says, "Nobody comes here to love us."
Nobody.
That is like such a capture of the power of it. But the outcome of all that is there are women who leave that behind, and they come to the arms of Jesus, and they find new life, and it's a long process of relationship building, but it actually redeems souls and forever and lives here and now.
Yeah, and it's long, deep work of showing up and pouring out your authentic love and friendship. We were never people who went in and said, if you don't leave tonight, you'll burn in the eternal fires of hell. That was just never our approach. Our approach was to become authentic friends with them and to believe that the power of the love of Jesus resident in our lives would shift something in the atmosphere, and they would feel it when we walked in, and they would miss us when we left, and they would crave it the next time until they could understand what real love was. And to watch that happen was a beautiful arc.
I can say, as the pastor of the place, I said we took some risks because I wasn't there on the ground, but I was certainly in the loop of what was going on. And in my office, I got a call from the owner of the club, who was not living in Anderson, an absentee owner, but called because the business was being changed, and that was costing money. And that owner called to threaten the church, threaten me. You better call these people back, or we're going to have them evicted by the police and so on. I remember telling you that, and you said, "Good."
I thought, then I'll get in the newspaper, probably get a spot on the Today Show.
Yeah, well.
And Jim said, maybe there's another way than going to jail for Jesus.
We laugh about it in a way, but it's serious business because you can't come against the devil's front line and then just think it's going to all be easy. It's not. It requires sacrifice and investment, and that's what Children Promise does too in every place that it is. It's helping to provide space and opportunity and a witness to children who are economically or otherwise disadvantaged all around the world. And today we're talking especially about this project in Bangladesh. So as people are hearing us today, let's say somebody said, oh man, that sounds very interesting. How much does it cost, let's say, to sponsor a child at the House of Hope in the day program? What would you say?
$32 a month will provide services for one child for a month.
$32 a month. And so can someone sign up and say, I just want to go month to month, or I have to make a commitment for 5 years?
We will take any money that you want to give us.
Okay, well, I mean, the hope is that
The hope
people
is that
would
it will be
normally
an
would certainly make an
ongoing-
annual
Yes.
commitment, for the next 12 months,
Right.
I will invest $32.
Yeah.
And that would be a contribution to Children Promise, which is making that possible.
Yes.
And how many children at that House of Hope in the town that is itself a brothel, how many kids need sponsors right now that you could, I say name, I mean, you're, to protect the children, we can't name them, but
Yeah.
there's a number, there are persons that you could identify. How many?
So the Church of God there has identified about 255 kids who live in this community. About 50 of those will be residents at the MENA project, and the remaining 200 we're looking for sponsors for them through
To
the
be at
House
the
of
House of Hope in the day program.
In the day program.
All right, for the residential program at the MENA project, what's the monthly cost?
So the residential program is $50 a month, so that's providing their housing, their meals, education, all in the context of the loving presence of the church.
And there are, how many spots do you need sponsors for there?
We need sponsors for 12 more girls at the MENA project.
There's room for 12 more. There are scores of young
Yes.
girls there already.
The
But there's
capacity
room-
of the MENA project,
would be 12 more.
right, 12 more.
And if we had sponsors, that would be such a big Christmas win.
Oh my
And
God.
I just want to say, if you're a woman, if you're a part of Christian Women Connection, if you have ever been, this is what we want you to do. We believe so much in this work, in what it means. I just came home from Africa, from Uganda and Cairo. And you both know that what we see when we travel abroad is it takes so little of all that we have, that isn't ours anyway, but to make a life-changing impact on folks in need in places like Bangladesh. And so we encourage all of our women. We helped sponsor the first set of numbers. We want to blow them away with love and support and funds, because we believe in doing work to build a better world, particularly for women and children. And this is a direct an incredible way to invest in their futures. And if they're not supported, they're going to be where their mothers are right now.
And another generation might be lost.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you just brought up an important dynamic, I think, Kimberly, in this whole concept. $32 a month, you might think, well, I don't have that in my budget. I don't have the margin, or $50 a month. I just can't do that. But you know what you could do? Maybe you are part of a small group Bible study at your church who could share that. Or maybe a Sunday school class, or the choir, or your worship band, or even in your family. You might have siblings or nieces and nephews who might band together, and each could put in $5 a month. I mean, it's doable. And the impacts of it are so phenomenally great and good. In this very desperately broken world, it's sometimes easy to feel overwhelmed, like, what's the use? Why even try? I look at the headlines and think, it's just hopeless. Why am I even thinking about trying to change the course of history? And yet, then I'm reminded by conversations like this and by the Spirit stirring in us. The Lord makes a way for each of us to follow Him into giving life and destroying the works of the devil. And those are the two dynamics of this work. It's giving life, literally, in this world and forever. and it's destroying the works of the devil. What else could be more satisfying or fulfilling than that might be? As you've been listening to us, you might have some questions that have come to mind, and we want to encourage you to submit your questions. You can do that. There's a number that will come up on the screen that will be a place where you can text your question, and we'd like to tackle your questions insofar as we're able to help clarify for you what's happening here, and also maybe on the larger issue of human trafficking. We have some people here who know what the challenges might be. So feel free to text in your question, and we'll be glad to tackle them. Kimberly, if someone wanted to respond today, they're feeling like, I'm feeling called to help CWC with a traffic light. What would they do? What could they contribute? How can they contact and get involved?
You can go to our website at christianwomenconnection.org. I believe they have it available for you on the screen. And we have a traffic light link that you can see all of the ministries that we partner with, all the works that we partner with. There is a direct link on that page to Children of Promise and the MENA Project and the day school. So we want you to know there are many ways to get involved.
So somebody could choose one of those projects if they wanted to designate their gift, or they could just give generally to the traffic light, knowing these are the front doors of the work.
Exactly, and we want to invite folks. We have an upcoming traffic summit, anti-traffic summit in February called Hidden in Plain Sight, hosted by our New Creation Church in Flint, Michigan. You could be a part of that. You could find out how we're working in these areas around the world. I mentioned I just came home from Africa, and when you sit with women there, you ask them what they need, and they say more sewing centers. Sewing centers is something that we've been engaging in helping to build in East Africa to directly speak to the need of women and poverty and anti-trafficking in places across Uganda and the DRC and now into Kenya. And to have just been there last month sitting with those women, how can we help? What can we do? And they say, build more sewing centers. We can build an entire sewing center with an instructor and the sewing machines and the brick and mortar, and give these women an opportunity to learn a trade and earn a wage and really transform an entire community for $10,000 is all it takes. And to have just seen the impact of what our engagement can do, I think the thing I want to convey is just what you said. There are all these ways that you could choose to partner. Just find a way and do something to help us get after this really plight in our human existence in our time.
I'm so thankful that I'm part of a church family, the Church of God, which is learning how to collaborate effectively of something of such great magnitude. And we're here today to tell you, in the Church of God, there is a way you can change the world, and you can do it this Christmas in these ways. We have some questions that have just come up, and we're so thankful for those who have sent them in. Let's see what that first one says. What are the signs that someone might be a victim of human trafficking? So here's someone who's asking, and let's talk about this context, which you've observed in our country or in Canada.
So domestically, there are all sorts of red flags and signs that you should look out for. We have resources on that we can provide you with, but just a few off the top of my head. You always want to be, clued in to what your young person is connected to online safety. You just can't say enough about that. That really is the marketplace now, because this is where people pose as different personalities and entrap folks in relationships. Honestly, that doesn't just end at, young women, young boys, seniors, older women are being sort of drawn into this and used in other ways to fund works. So internet safety, top. Make sure you're checking those phones. You know what your kids are into. You know who they're talking with. You have the passwords. Oftentimes with young folks, you're going to know they have a public account and then they have private accounts that they don't want you to know about those. I would be suspicious if I had a young woman in my home or in my class or in my youth group who was just sleepy all the time, just not putting forth the effort that she used to. Any sort of changes in her demeanor, in her person, her engagement, her level of zeal for life. You might not know she's sneaking out of the middle of the night to meet someone or to do things that are not known to you. You want to look for if there are extravagant gifts that are being given. No 14-year-old girl should be carrying a Gucci bag, right? There's nothing that...
Well, or even routinely receiving gifts from someone
Routinely
who's not in the
receiving
family
gifts.
or known and trusted.
Those sorts of things. Boyfriends who are possessive, don't want you to be around your family, don't want you to be around your other friends. I say this to young women, if you start to see seeds of that in a relationship, get out. If you're a parent and you start to see that with your children, shut those down. Those are just not safe things. And cell phones are really important because that's where you can kind of begin to see what's happening. So be able to connect in there and see where folks are coming and going. One of the things you should also know is, how do you engage someone who's in sex trafficking? This is the really hard part of it. It's really hard to prove. Most victims won't turn on their traffickers, and it oftentimes has to be her choice to leave. And so what you can do is you can let her know she's loved, she's supported, you're there. Call out the things that you think are unhealthy, and then be ready when she's ready to get out. You could also reach out to ministries and works such as Grace Horizon and other ministries around the U.S. who help women who want to have an exit plan.
And also, back to something you've referenced earlier, Kimberly, CWC can help your local church understand how to become engaged in your local community, and that's such a great opportunity for the church, not just for those who are already wounded by being trafficked, perhaps, but by becoming a resource to help prevent that elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And I know of a story because of Child Traffic Light, which was being discussed in local church, and the local church here in the Great Lakes area was very uncomfortable with the subject. Well, that's not relevant for us. It doesn't. It's not a thing for us. We have other fish to fry, so to speak. But in this local church, the testimony was given to me that was being debated in a meeting of the church, like a congregational business meeting, and then a senior saint in the room stood up and said, "I just have to speak, and I'm trembling doing so, but it does impact where we live." And then she began to weep and said, "Because my granddaughter in this town has been lost into it." And suddenly the whole church stopped, because it's that thing that people don't talk about and we don't acknowledge, but it's that close. Even as the kingdom of heaven is at hand, as Jesus would say, so is the kingdom of darkness. And this is a place where your church can learn how to look for the signs and so on with some a little more deep exploration. So thank you for that. Let's go to this next question up on the screen that's come in. What laws and regulations exist to combat human trafficking? Let me just say, I think internationally there is some very robust legal frameworks to prosecute and to apprehend and to make such trafficking illegal, but the challenge is enforcement.
Yes.
And people pay off police officers in some countries, and there's bribery, and there's also money under the table, and enforcement is often a very, very difficult regime. But the laws exist to make this outlawed, for sure, in most jurisdictions in the world.
Yes, so sex trafficking is classified in the law as anything that takes place under coercion. So that any sort of sex act or related that takes place under coercion and there is money exchanged. And so it's prolific. And if you notice in the last decade, it's really, we've had a lot more discussion about it. It's become known more in the mainstream. If you go to the airport, you can't close the door in your restroom stall without there's a number. If you've been trafficked, call this. And so the idea is if you see something, say something. What you just said, Jim, is so true. I've never spoken about this topic, told stories from my own life, that someone hasn't come up to me in that venue and said, this happened to my daughter, or I was in one of those clubs. You just described my life. So the idea that it isn't in our churches or relevant for the work that we do is for sure false. There are laws, and the laws are really have become strengthened in the last decade. The problem, as you said, is getting the victim to take it to a level of prosecution because she fears reciprocation or that something will happen to her child or her family.
Extended family members are often threatened.
Yeah.
If you try and interrupt the chain.
And that's how trafficking happens. The controlling aspect of it is the threat to something or someone that you care about. And so it's very, very hard to break those bonds in a way that she's able to get free and want to follow through and see that happen.
As you were discussing that, I was reminded of some history in the Church of God that many people don't fully understand, and that is that D.S. Warner, who was the catalyst of the movement, you might say, in the late 19th century, was early on very much in sync with the Salvation Army. And the Salvation Army, which shares a similar theology as the Church of God, the Wesleyan holiness understanding, was one of the first, if maybe the first organized opposition back in the 19th century to this traffic in flesh. And the Salvation Army, because they wore uniforms, often were themselves attacked because they were recognized as those who were intervening and interdicting. And the courage required for the Salvation Army officers and soldiers in their context to step up is an inspiring narrative. And D.S. Warner was actually reproducing and advertising in the Gospel Trumpet, one of our original mouthpieces, about the work of the Salvation Army. So we come to this table with a long history of engagement and heart from our earliest beginning. Another question comes up. I think you'll see it on your screen. Why is it called MENA Project? Heather, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. MENA Project is called MENA Project because of a woman named Mina, who is a part of this community in Dalautia, Bangladesh, and she was one of the first people, first women who inspired this dream of having the House of Hope and the MENA Project.
And this bears witness
Yeah.
to that vision and courage. Another question. How can survivors of human trafficking be supported and rehabilitated? And let me jump right in here that one of the long-standing partners in our Child Traffic Light is the Hope Ranch for Women. That is resident in Wichita, Kansas, was born in what is called the Christ Church in Wichita, which is a Church of God congregation, and it's a literal ranch that over time has been acquired, and it's been my privilege to be there a few times, and it is designed to help women who have been trafficked recover and to develop peace and an anchored presence and a future. And so it's not something where you come and stay for a day or two. This is something for weeks and months and maybe even more than a year, but it's designed exactly for this. And the Hope Ranch has been a trusted partner in our Child Traffic Light, and we're so thankful for those who have invested there, especially in Wichita. You might think, well, Wichita, again, a place that Wichita, Kansas, surely this can't be an issue there. Sure it is in Wichita, Kansas, and also it's very accessible from many, many states and communities around, so it's a great option. But how else would you speak to this question about being supported and rehabilitated?
It's very specific work to help folks walk through this kind of recovery. Hope Ranch is doing excellent work. Grace Horizon is doing excellent work, and Audrey Weaker there. Really rooted in post-traumatic stress recovery. And what we know is that even the DSM has changed their classification.
What's the DSM?
How we evaluate...
The diagnostic, it's the professional standard.
Diagnosis of certain psychological disorders or situations. And so they have understood in the last decade that these victims of trafficking have complex and compound trauma to deal with. And so you can't put them into a group setting with other folks who are going through hard times. It has to be a very specific, directed recovery plan that is for people who've been through this kind of experience. That's why programs like Hope Ranch and Grace Horizon, what they're doing at Pink Door with their residential, is so important, and supporting those folks who are equipped and know how to do it is really, really imperative.
Another question. We're so thankful for our audience so engaged. Traffic Light has been around for a while. What's the plan for the next 10 years? And let me also jump in first with an answer, because as we launched the Traffic Light, we wanted to test the water to see if the church would be responsive. We hoped that it would be, and it was. But time marches on, and so as we have evolved and learned, actually as the opportunities have expanded, like the MENA project was not on the table in 2014. Nobody had been to that village yet, or we didn't understand it. But as those opportunities expanded, I'm so thankful to say that CWC, as Christian Women Connection, has been very responsive and has embraced it as the resident lead now for the movement. So when you have questions or you have want to make an investment, so on, CWC has the web page has moved into their domain, and you can read more about it there. So the next 10 years is going to unfold with that leadership, with a group of women who are absolutely committed to the work. And Children of Promise, of course, has an ongoing trajectory of working with children who are vulnerable. And it's not always about being human trafficked, but economic vulnerability is the key or the common denominator in almost all of these cases. And so when Children of Promise comes to a place, and the way it works is there's a National Assembly of the Church of God on the ground, and we're at work in 90 countries. And one of those opens a door, and there's dialogue with Children of Promise, because Children of Promise does not deliver its ministry apart from a resident body of Christ. Some groups, sponsorship groups, actually bring staff in from abroad to help manage the program, or maybe hire people on the ground to do it. But Children of Promise was conceived to be an outreach of the local church in the communities it serves. It's really important because that means that the families and the children and the witness of the community ties the ministry to that local church. Even though Children of Promise is managing or supervising and helping to resource it, and also holding it accountable to make sure that the resources deliver. But that is an ongoing project, together with CWC's commitment to be in the lead role. And then, of course, our own global strategy at Church of God Ministries, I say our own, in the office where I sit, has robust investment in this front line also. So things like the Pink Door have actually matriculated, if I could use the term, something that was born in the hearts of our resident mission staff in Europe, in Berlin, which sees so much trafficking around the world, converges at Berlin in the heart of Europe. That program has flourished, and as it has advanced, matriculated to be now led by people who are resident in Germany, who are German nationals. The Church of God in Germany has partnered with us from early on, and now is assuming a responsibility for its leadership, even as our own global strategy staff is still engaged and now relocated to Cairo, where there's new work starting. Global strategy is no stranger to this work, and is still moving forward with our staff that may be American or Canadian passport holders and stationed abroad. And so that work on all three fronts, it's a collaborative effort. But CWC is now holding the doorway open for the whole church as a point of contact writ large.
For us, it really looks like three emphases, in that is education and advocacy and support. We really want to make sure that the Church of God is educated about this issue and understands the implications in their own contexts. And we want to advocate for victims and overcomers so that they have a place to feel welcomed, embraced, loved, and wanted through the journey, and when they're able to get to a place of recovery. And then just support for resourcing to these incredible ministries that are on the ground, in neighborhoods, in real places, like Delatia, it's very hard for me to say with my southern accent, and like Cairo, and like Anderson, Indiana, so that they're resourced to do the good work they know how to do.
There's so much to say. Thank you, Kimberly, for taking this on, and Heather, thank you for leading the way at Children of Promise, and for you joining us today in these harried weeks before Christmas. And as we close, I'm going to make an observation as the only guy at the table. And that's because when the child traffic light began, and actually just before that, as I was Kimberly's pastor and we were talking about some of the work she was doing, I myself had to do some homework as a pastor and now in my seat at Church of God Ministries. And I read some books, and there's a lot of great work out there being done, research and so on. But one thing that jumped off the page at me in a book written by a reporter from the Toronto Globe and Mail, which is a major newspaper in Canada and throughout the English-speaking world, and he was researching the sex industry, the sex trafficking industry. And this author, made it very clear that one of the keys are men. Men hold the keys. And that if men were not buying sex, then the whole industry would collapse. And so one thing I want to say to the audience is it's not just about how we intervene for those who are most vulnerable that we can see and we can reach, but it's also in our local churches. Men need to be engaged about their sexuality and about their responsibilities and about the dangers of moving off the lane of Jesus in what they consider to be acceptable, normative, or really not my problem. Every man alive has a part to play in helping to address this part of the devil's work. Once more, Kimberly and Heather, thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us, and we wish you a very Merry Christmas. And when you're just walking away from the town hall and thinking, what am I going to buy for Uncle Harry or Aunt Susie? Think about what you've heard today. Honor Jesus and honor them by investing in the changing of a life at Children of Promise or CWC. Thanks so much. Godspeed. Merry Christmas.